All right, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Engineering Major Philosophy Minor. Hope you guys are having a good Sunday afternoon. As you can probably see, I am in a hotel room right now because I recently just landed at the location of my business trip, and so I'm hanging out at a hotel. But on my on my flight over here, I started reading Volume 1 of the Gulag Archipelago by Aleksander Solzhenitsyn. If you guys have heard of Jordan Peterson or watched any Jordan Peterson for any length of time, you would see that he mentions the Russian Revolution quite frequently, and he also mentions reading the Gulag Archipelago. And I very happily got myself a copy of this, and right now I'm on about page 60 something in the book. But so far, the book is pretty awesome. It's quite interesting. It's amazing. If you are somebody who is into kind of historical nonfiction, this is an excellent read. And if you're not familiar with what the Gulag Archipelago is, it's basically a piece of literature written by this guy named Aleksander Solzhenitsyn. He was a soldier in the Red Army. He fought, I believe, in World War II, potentially World War I. But anyway, this book that he wrote is basically memoirs, not only from him, but from other people who were also in Soviet internment camps called gulags in Soviet Russia. And this book basically, Alexander Solzhenitsyn actually won a Nobel Prize for this book. But it basically is a piece of literature that precipitated, at least partially responsible for the downfall of the Soviet Union, because basically he started telling the truth about what was happening. And what's really interesting is if you read the foreword of this book, what you find is that basically there were initial manuscripts of this that they would hand around the prison camps, and of course this type of exposure of kind of what the government was doing was completely illegal, so they had to do this in secret. And basically you'd get a manuscript and you had 24 hours to read it. Now this book is about a 600 or 700 page book, at least volume 1, so you can imagine people were scrambling to read this in 24 hours, and then they had to pass it on for fear that they might get caught. But the reason why I decided to make this video, just a quick one, is because I wanted to read you guys an excerpt from kind of the first part, or at least the first few pages of this book. I've kind of been going through, and maybe you can see I've highlighted just like a ton of stuff. This is one of those books where it just seems like every single phrase is important, so you guys might look at all those highlighter marks and be like, dude, you're going a little bit nuts. But in this particular part, Solzhenitsyn is talking about the massive famines that happened throughout Russia, and it was as a result of basically imprisoning all the farmers, and the farmers were, and also because of like collectivist policy, and they labeled all these farmers as kulaks. And so I want to read just a couple, maybe like a paragraph or two from this book. And I'm not going to do a super deep analysis of it in this video, but I wanted to provide it to you guys as just kind of food for thought. Think to yourselves if you guys can identify things that are happening in kind of society right now, possibly within our government right now or within politics right now, that kind of align with some of the things that are happening. So I'm going to go ahead and start reading now. In Russian, a kulak is a miserly, dishonest, rural trader who grows rich not by his own labor but through someone else's, through usury and operating as a middleman. In every locality, even before the revolution, such kulaks could be numbered on one's fingers, and the revolution totally destroyed their basis of activity. Subsequently, after 1917, by a transfer of meaning, the name kulak began to be applied in official and propaganda literature, whence it moved into general usage, to all those who in any way hired workers, even if it was only when they were temporarily short of working hands in their own families. But we must keep in mind that after the revolution, it was impossible to pay less than a quote-unquote fair wage for all such labor. The committees of the poor, that's an organization in the Soviet Russia, and the village Soviets looked after the interest of landless laborers. Just let somebody try to swindle a landless laborer, exclamation point. To this very day, in fact, the hiring of labor at a fair wage is permitted in the Soviet Union. But the inflation of the scathing term kulak proceeded relentlessly, and by 1930, all strong peasants in general were being so called. All peasants strong in management, strong in work, or even strong merely in convictions. The term kulak was used to smash the strength of the peasantry. Let us remember, let us open our eyes. Only a dozen years had passed since the great decree on the land, that very decree without which the peasants would have refused to follow the Bolsheviks. So right there, just to give a quick little analysis, it's interesting how we see the kind of redefinition of sort of derogatory terms. The kulak, like the word kulak in Russian, initially meant something that was very, very bad, but then the term kind of got bastardized basically to just refer to essentially anybody who was doing better than anybody else, anybody who was considered bourgeoisie if you kind of want to go back on the philosophical track towards Marxism. Let me see if I can find this other quote. So a little bit later in this section, like raging beasts, abandoning every concept of, quote, humanity, unquote, abandoning all humane principles which had evolved through the millennia, they began to like the Soviet police, they began to round up the very best farmers and their families and drive them, stripped of their possessions, naked into the northern wastes, into the tundra and the taiga. Such a mass movement could not help but develop subsequent ramifications. It became necessary to rid the villages also of those peasants who had merely manifested an aversion to joining the collective farms, or an absence of inclination for the collective life, which they had never seen with their own eyes, about which they knew nothing, and which they suspected would mean a life of forced labor and famine under the leadership of loafers. Then it was also necessary to get rid of those peasants, some of them not at all prosperous, who, because of their daring, their physical strength, their determination, their outspokenness at meetings, and their love of justice, were favorites with their fellow villagers, and by virtue of their independence, were therefore dangerous to the leadership of the collective farm. Notice the use of the word, sorry, the camera, it looks like the camera was kind of messed up there for a second, but think about the words that are used here. Therefore dangerous to the leadership of the collective farm. So what Solzhenitsyn is saying here is basically they started arresting everybody because, every idea, any desire to have more than the status quo, any desire to be, let's say to have more than what was dictated by government equity policy was dangerous. Now listen to this. Beyond this, in every village, there were people who in one way or another had personally gotten in the way of the local activists. This was the perfect time to settle accounts with them of jealousy, envy, insult. A new word was needed for all these victims as a class, and it was born. By this time, it had no social or economic context whatsoever, but it had a marvelous sound. Podkulachnik. And this is defined as, quote, a person aiding the kulaks. In other words, I consider you an accomplice of the enemy, and that finishes you, exclamation point. So, it's so interesting to me because I get a little bit of chills when I read stuff like this because I think about all the terms that are being used in kind of in in an attacking fashion against people in order to label them as somehow less than others, you know. How certain terms have gotten redefined over the last years to be very arbitrary, to encompass an arbitrary number of things. And then, of course, we have the advocation for, you know, government-mandated equity policies. And here in Solzhenitsyn's very words, he says the initial people, you know, who were called Kulaks, they suspected that this collectivist farm stuff would mean a life of forced labor and famine. Now, you can see from what happened in Soviet Russia that they were absolutely right. And we now know that, you know, typically when socialist and communist policies start getting implemented, it sort of inevitably leads to this kind of stuff. So anyway, guys, the video is getting to be 11 minutes. I want to throw this up on YouTube. But, you know, rewind this, listen to it again, think about the words here, and just kind of, I wanted to give you guys some food for thought of some parallels with what is happening in politics now, because it's very, very interesting how similar this kind of post-Russian Revolution, you know, Soviet Russia, and kind of like the ideology and the political principles and things that happened are super similar to a lot of things that are happening in today's life, not only just in the US, but kind of around the world. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Leave comments below, telling me what you guys think. Obviously, subscribe, like, share would be greatly appreciated, but of course you don't have to. I'm just making this for the discussion. So far, so good. I highly recommend the Gulag Archipelago. I'm sure that I will be talking about many more quotes from this book in videos to come. So yeah, go ahead and pick yourself up a copy of this. And I'm going to go ahead and keep reading. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Later.